On November 14th, 1987, two veteran pilots walked out of a Chicago hotel at 6:47 a.m. caught on grainy security footage. They were scheduled to fly 237 passengers to Denver at 9:15 a.m. Their rental car was found idling at O'Hare International Airport. Driver's door open, keys in the ignition. But Captain Michael Torres and First Officer David Chun were never seen again. No bodies, no ransom, no explanation. For 36 years, their disappearance remained one of aviation's most disturbing unsolved mysteries, until a demolition crew broke through the walls of an abandoned airport maintenance hangar and discovered something that would turn everything we thought we knew into a nightmare. If you're fascinated by mysteries that refuse to stay buried, subscribe now, because what they found wasn't just evidence, it was a warning. The November rain fell in heavy sheets across the tarmac at O'Hare International Airport, turning runway lights into blurred halos of yellow and white. Sarah Vance pressed her face against the terminal window, watching a plane taxi slowly through the downpour. She was 7 years old, clutching a stuffed rabbit her father had won for her at the state fair. "Is Daddy's plane big?" she asked quietly. Catherine Vance knelt beside her daughter, forcing a smile that never reached her eyes. She had checked her watch every 3 minutes for over an hour. "Very big, sweetie," she said. "The biggest one out there." But Michael Torres's plane never took off that morning. By noon, Catherine's hands were trembling as airport security escorted her and Sarah into a private room. By evening, the FBI had sealed off the rental car lot. By midnight, Sarah's stuffed rabbit lay abandoned on a plastic chair in the security office, its button eyes reflecting fluorescent light as her mother sobbed into a phone, struggling to explain to Michael's parents that their son had simply vanished. The official investigation lasted 14 months. The unanswered questions lasted a lifetime. 36 years later, Sarah Vance stood once again inside the same terminal. She was no longer a child clutching a toy, but a woman gripping a folder marked confidential. Inside were photographs that should not exist, evidence that defied explanation, and the memory of a phone call from a demolition foreman who had whispered 3 words before the line went dead. "They're still here." The sledgehammer struck the concrete wall with a sharp crack that echoed through Hangar 7B like a gunshot. Dust burst into the air as Tommy Garrett staggered back, coughing into his sleeve. The hangar had been scheduled for demolition for 3 weeks, yet the city had repeatedly delayed the work, citing paperwork issues no one could clearly explain. Now, on a gray October morning in 2023, the crew had finally been cleared to tear it down. "You good?" Marcus called from across the cavernous space, his voice bouncing off walls untouched by daylight for decades. Tommy waved him off, squinting through the dust. "Yeah, this wall's thicker than it should be," he muttered. "Gonna take a few more hits." He swung again. This time, the concrete gave way. Behind it wasn't insulation or empty space, but a small, sealed room no blueprint had ever shown. Tommy raised his flashlight and shone it through the opening. The beam caught metal, then leather, then the unmistakable outline of a human shoe. The flashlight slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. "Marcus," Tommy said, his voice tight, "call 911. "What? Why?" "Just do it. Now." Within an hour, police swarmed the hangar. Yellow tape sealed off the structure as Detective Rachel Kim stepped inside the hidden room, her breath visible in the cold autumn air. The space measured roughly 8 by 10 feet. No windows. No visible door from the inside. 2 bodies sat slumped against the far wall, their positions suggesting a slow death, perhaps from dehydration, perhaps from suffocation. Both wore pilot uniforms. Detective James Holloway stepped in behind her, his face drained of color beneath the industrial lights. "The badges check out," he said quietly. "Captain Michael Torres. First Officer David Chun. Missing since November 1987. Rachel crouched beside the remains, careful not to disturb anything. The uniforms were eerily well preserved, protected for decades by the sealed chamber. Beside Torres's right hand lay a small notebook, its pages filled with faded but still legible handwriting. Resting on Chen's lap was, "On November 14th, 1987, two veteran pilots walked out of a Chicago hotel at 6:47 a.m. caught on grainy security footage. They were scheduled to fly 237 passengers to Denver at 9:15 a.m. Their rental car was found idling at O'Hare International Airport. Driver's door open, keys in the ignition. But Captain Michael Torres and First Officer David Chun were never seen again. No bodies, no ransom, no explanation. For 36 years, their disappearance remained one of aviation's most disturbing unsolved mysteries until a demolition crew broke through the walls of an abandoned airport maintenance hangar and discovered something that would turn everything we thought we knew into a nightmare. If you're fascinated by mysteries that refuse to stay buried, subscribe now, because what they found wasn't just evidence, it was a warning. The November rain fell in heavy sheets across the tarmac at O'Hare International Airport, turning the runway lights into blurred halos of yellow and white. Sarah Vance pressed her face against the terminal window, watching a plane taxi slowly through the downpour. She was 7 years old, clutching a stuffed rabbit her father had won for her at the state fair. "Is Daddy's plane big?" she asked. Catherine Vance knelt beside her daughter, forcing a smile that never reached her eyes. She had checked her watch every 3 minutes for the past hour. "Very big, sweetie. The biggest one out there." But Michael Torres's plane never took off that morning. By noon, Catherine's hands were shaking as airport security led her and Sarah into a private room. By evening, the FBI had sealed off the rental car lot. By midnight, Sarah's stuffed rabbit sat abandoned on a plastic chair in the airport security office, its button eyes reflecting harsh fluorescent lights while her mother sobbed into a phone, trying to explain to Michael's parents that their son had simply vanished. The official investigation lasted 14 months. The unofficial questions lasted a lifetime. 36 years later, Sarah Vance stood in that same terminal. No longer a child holding a toy, but a woman clutching a folder marked confidential. Inside were photographs that should not exist, evidence that defied explanation, and the memory of a phone call from a demolition foreman who had whispered 3 words before the line went dead. "They're still here." The sledgehammer struck the concrete wall with a crack that echoed through Hangar 7 be like a gunshot. Dust burst into the air as Tommy Garrett stumbled back, coughing into his sleeve. The hangar had been scheduled for demolition for weeks, but the city kept delaying, paperwork problems that never quite made sense. Now, on a gray Thursday morning in October 2023, the crew had finally been given clearance. "You good?" Marcus called from across the cavernous space, his voice bouncing off walls that hadn't seen daylight in decades. Tommy waved him off, squinting through the dust. "Yeah, this wall's thicker than it should be. Gonna take another few hits." He swung again. This time, the concrete gave way. Behind it wasn't insulation or empty space, but a small room no one knew existed. The blueprints showed nothing here, just solid wall. Tommy pulled out his flashlight and aimed it through the hole. The beam caught metal, then leather, then the unmistakable shape of a human shoe. The flashlight slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. "Marcus," he said, his voice tight, unfamiliar. "Call 911. "What? Why?" "Just do it. Now." Within an hour, the hangar was crawling with police. Yellow crime scene tape sealed off the structure as Detective Rachel Kim stepped into the hidden room, her breath visible in the cold air despite it being autumn. The space measured roughly 8 by 10 feet. No windows. No visible door from the inside. 2 bodies sat slumped against the far wall, positioned in a way that suggested a slow death, perhaps from suffocation or dehydration. Both wore pilot uniforms. Rachel's partner, Detective James Holloway, stepped in behind her, his face pale, under the industrial lights. "The badges check out," he said quietly. "Captain Michael Torres. First Officer David Chun. Missing since November 1987. Rachel crouched carefully near the bodies. The uniforms were remarkably well preserved, protected by decades of isolation. Near Torres's right hand lay a small notebook, its faded handwriting still partly legible. Resting on Chen's lap was a flight manual open to a page detailing emergency procedures. "How did they get in here?" Rachel asked, though she already knew no one could answer. James reviewed the architectural plans on his tablet. This hangar was built in 1985, used until '89, locked and empty ever since. "Someone put them here," Rachel said, standing slowly. Her knees protested. This wasn't an accident. The room had been sealed from the outside. As she photographed the scene, each flash revealed details that made her stomach tighten. Deep scratches in the concrete walls, gouges that looked like fingernail marks. A jacket carefully arranged on the floor between the bodies, as if meant to serve as a pillow. And near the corner, carved into the concrete with something sharp, 3 words, "Flight 227 knows." Rachel photographed the message twice. "James," she asked quietly, "what flight were they scheduled to fly?" James's fingers froze on the screen. "Flight 227, Chicago to Denver. It departed 2 hours late with a replacement crew." The hangar suddenly felt much colder. Sarah Vance received the call at 2:17 p.m., sitting at her desk in the Chicago Tribune newsroom. For 15 years, she had been an investigative journalist. For 36, the daughter of a man who vanished without explanation. These 2 identities had long ago merged into one relentless obsession. "Miss Vance," the voice said, careful and professional. "This is Detective Rachel Kim, Chicago PD. I'm calling about the disappearance of Captain Michael Torres." Sarah's pen stopped mid-word. "Have you found something?" she asked. "I'd prefer to discuss it in person. I can be there in 20 minutes. When Rachel closed the conference room door and said, "We found your father," Sarah's legs gave out beneath her. The photographs told the rest of the story. "How did they die?" Sarah asked. "Preliminary findings suggest asphyxiation," Rachel said carefully. "They were alive when the room was sealed. There's evidence they tried to escape." Sarah had imagined every possible ending. This had never been one of them. "Why?" she whispered. Rachel slid one final photograph across the table, the message carved into concrete. "Flight 227 knows. Did your father ever mention anything unusual about that flight?" Rachel asked, "Anything at all?" Sarah studied the photograph, her mind racing through decades of fragmented memories. Her father had always been careful never to bring his work stress home, maintaining a bright cheerfulness around her, even when she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. But there had been moments, brief flashes of something darker beneath the surface. 2 weeks before he disappeared, Sarah said slowly. "He came home late. I was supposed to be asleep, but I heard him arguing with my mother in the kitchen. He said something about a manifest that didn't match, about passengers who shouldn't have been on a flight." Rachel leaned forward. "Did he say which flight?" Sarah closed her eyes, reaching back through the fog of childhood memory. She had been 7 years old, hiding at the top of the stairs, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Her father's voice had been low and urgent, angry in a way she had never heard before. He said it was the Denver route, Sarah said, opening her eyes. He said someone was using commercial flights for something else. Something wrong. My mother told him to let it go, that it wasn't his problem. But he said he couldn't. He said he was a pilot, and that meant something. Rachel and James exchanged a glance. Ms. Vance, Rachel said carefully, "Do you know if your father kept any records? Logbooks, notes, anything that might document what he discovered?" "The FBI took everything after he disappeared," Sarah replied. "They returned most of it years later, but I never went through it properly. It was too painful." She straightened in her chair, her journalist instincts pushing past the grief. "But I still have all the boxes. They're in my storage unit." Rachel stood. "I'd like to examine them, if you're comfortable with that. Whatever your father uncovered got him killed. And after 36 years, whoever did this probably thinks they're safe." Sarah looked down at the photograph of her father's final resting place, at the words carved into concrete with what must have been dying strength. "Flight 227 knows. They're not safe," Sarah said quietly. "Not anymore." The storage unit smelled of cardboard and time. Sarah pulled the chain on the bare bulb overhead, casting harsh light across stacks of boxes that represented the entire investigation into her father's disappearance. She had paid the rental fee every month for 36 years, unable to throw away what felt like the last pieces of him. Rachel and James stood back, letting Sarah take the lead. This place felt sacred in its own way, a daughter's shrine to an unsolved mystery. "The FBI boxes are on the left," Sarah said, her voice echoing slightly in the concrete space. "Personal effects on the right. I kept them separate." She pulled down a banker's box marked FBI Return 1989 and set it on the folding table she kept in the unit for the rare moments she forced herself to confront the past. Inside were her father's logbooks, meticulously kept records of every flight he had ever piloted. Commercial aviation demanded precision, and Michael Torres had been thorough to the point of obsession. Rachel slipped on latex gloves and began turning the pages carefully. Each entry listed the date, flight number, route, aircraft type, weather conditions, and any notable incidents. Torres's handwriting was precise, almost mechanical in its consistency. "Until here," Rachel said, pointing to an entry dated October 23rd, 1987. "The handwriting changes. See how it gets more rushed? And there are margin notes." James leaned in, using his phone's flashlight to illuminate the cramped text. "Flight 227. Chicago to Denver," he read. "Standard route. But there's something written in the margin. Can you read it?" Sarah moved closer, squinting at her father's handwriting. "Passenger manifest discrepancy," she read aloud. "Seat 14C occupied. No boarding record." The three of them stared at the words in silence. "He noticed someone on the plane who hadn't officially boarded," James said. "How is that even possible? You can't get past security without a ticket and ID." "Not without help," Rachel replied, turning the page. The next entry was dated October 30th. "Another flight, 227. 14C again," Rachel said. "Same passenger. Spoke to Chun. He sees it too." "David Chun was his regular first officer," Sarah said. "They flew together twice a week on the Denver route." Rachel continued flipping through the logbook. "November 3rd. Another flight, 227. Another margin note." She read silently, then aloud. "Cargo manifest off by 200 pounds. Passenger in 14C carried large case, not checked through system." November 10th, James read. "Chin agrees we need to report. Who do we trust?" Rachel turned one final page. November 13th, meeting at hotel before flight. Chen has proof. The last entry wasn't written in the logbook at all. It was on a loose sheet of paper, folded and tucked into the back cover, nearly invisible. Sarah's hands trembled as she unfolded it. The handwriting was rushed, almost frantic. If you're reading this, something has gone wrong. Flight 227 is being used to transport something illegal. The passenger in 14C is not a passenger. He's a courier. I don't know what he's carrying, but it's heavy, expensive, and people are willing to kill to protect it. Chun and I documented everything. We were going to turn it over to the FAA today, but someone knows. Someone at the airline knows. We know. The hotel phone rang at 3 a.m. No one spoke, but I could hear breathing. Chen's room got the same call. We're going to the airport early. We're going to find someone in federal law enforcement before our scheduled flight. If we don't make it, look for the photographs. Chen hid them somewhere safe. Gate 17. Under. The note ended mid-sentence, as if her father had been interrupted. Sarah's vision swam. He knew, she whispered. He knew they were in danger, and he walked into it anyway. Rachel carefully photographed the note, then the logbook entries. Gate 17, she said. Does that mean anything to you? That was their usual departure gate for the Denver flights, Sarah replied. But the airport's been renovated a dozen times since 1987. Gate 17 doesn't exist anymore. It's part of the international terminal now. James was already scrolling through his phone, pulling up historical airport layouts. Wait, he said. In 1987, Gate 17 was in Concourse B. That entire section was rebuilt in 1995. He looked up, his expression grim. Hangar 7B was the maintenance facility for Concourse B. The pieces were beginning to form a picture. Still incomplete, still obscured, but unmistakable. Rachel thought about the sealed room, about two men dying slowly in the dark, while above them, planes continued to take off and land. Life moving forward as if nothing had happened. Chin hid the photographs somewhere near Gate 17, Rachel said. Your father was about to write where, but someone stopped him. She looked at Sarah. Someone was watching them. Someone at the hotel. Someone who knew they were going to report what they'd found. And instead of killing them quietly, James added, making it look like an accident, they made them disappear. Why? Sarah stared at her father's final words, at the sentence that never reached its end. Because they needed everyone to think the pilots ran away, she said. If they'd been found dead, there would have been an investigation into why. But if they vanished, people would assume guilt. Embezzlement, an affair, witness protection, anything except the truth. Rachel closed the logbook carefully. We need to find those photographs. If they still exist after 36 years, they're the only proof of what Torres and Chun discovered. Concourse B was demolished, James said, still scrolling. But the foundation is still there. They built the new terminal on top of it. Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a sensation she hadn't felt in decades. Hope, sharp, painful. Then we dig, she said. The security director at O'Hare International Airport was not pleased to receive a visit from Chicago PD at 9 o'clock at night. Gerald Summers had worked at the airport for 43 years, starting as a baggage handler in 1980 and working his way up to his current position. He met Rachel and James in his office overlooking the main terminal, his face set in practiced bureaucratic resistance. Digging under Concourse B is out of the question, he said before Rachel had even finished explaining. Do you have any idea how much that would cost? How much disruption it would cause? 2 men died, Mr. Summers, Rachel replied, her voice level. They were murdered and hidden in a maintenance hangar for 36 years. Whatever they found was worth killing for, and the evidence may still be on airport property. Summers leaned back in his chair, his expression softening slightly. I remember when they disappeared, he said. I was working the early shift that day. Everyone was talking about it. The FBI was everywhere for weeks. He paused. You really think you can solve it after all this time? Have to try. Summers was quiet for a long moment, then turned to his computer. The old foundation of Concourse runs under what's now the International Terminal's baggage claim, he said. Most of it was filled in during renovation, but there are still void spaces, crawl spaces, essentially that maintenance uses to access pipes and electrical conduits. He pulled up a schematic on his screen, a complex maze of lines and numbers that meant nothing to Rachel. Gate 17 would have been approximately here, he said, pointing to a section of the diagram. The gate structure itself was demolished, but the infrastructure beneath it wasn't completely removed. There's a maintenance access point about 50 feet from where the gate used to be. Can we access it? James asked. Not without proper authorization and safety equipment, Summers replied. Those spaces haven't been inspected in years. Could be unstable. Could be full of asbestos or worse. He looked between them. But if you get me a warrant, I can have a crew ready tomorrow morning. 4 a.m., before passenger traffic picks up. Rachel nodded. We'll have the warrant. She and James left the office and walked through the terminal toward the exit. Even at night, O'Hare hummed with activity. Travelers dragged suitcases across polished floors. Screens displayed endless lists of arrivals and departures. Overhead, announcements echoed in languages from around the world. Somewhere in this massive complex, 2 men had walked in planning to report a crime and had never walked out. What do you think they found? James asked as they pushed through the exit doors into the cold night air. Rachel thought about the logbook entries, about a passenger who appeared on flights without boarding records, about cargo that weighed more than the manifests indicated. Smuggling, she said. Drugs, maybe. Weapons. Something valuable enough that people would kill to protect it. But why use commercial flights? James asked, why not ship it through cargo services? Because cargo gets inspected, Rachel replied. Passenger carry-on bags got a cursory x-ray at best, especially in the 80s. Security was nowhere near what it is now. She pulled her coat tighter against the wind. If you had someone on the inside, someone who could get a courier past the checkpoint without proper documentation, you could move product in and out of major cities without anyone noticing. They reached Rachel's car, and she paused with her hand on the door handle. The airport stretched out behind them like a city unto itself, lights blazing against the dark sky. How many crimes had been committed here over the decades? How many people had passed through those terminals carrying secrets, guilt, contraband? Torres and Chin were good men, Rachel said quietly. They saw something wrong and decided to do the right thing, and it got them sealed in a concrete tomb. James climbed into the passenger seat. So we find the photographs, he said. We finished what they started. Rachel started the engine, but didn't pull away right away. She looked back at the terminal, at the places where old structures had been torn down and new ones built on top. The airport was a palimpsest, layers of history written over each other. Each generation believing it had erased what came before. But nothing was ever truly erased. Bodies had a way of surfacing. Secrets had a way of refusing to stay buried. Tomorrow morning, she said, putting the car in gear. 4 a.m. We find out what was worth dying for. As they drove away from the airport, neither of them noticed the dark sedan that pulled out of a parking spot 3 rows back and followed at a careful distance, headlights dimmed, maintaining the perfect interval that suggested professional surveillance. Some secrets didn't want to be found, and some secrets had protectors who never stopped watching. The maintenance access tunnel beneath O'Hare's International Terminal was barely 5 feet high, forcing Rachel to walk in a crouch that made her back ache within minutes. The beam of her flashlight cut through darkness that felt ancient, undisturbed. Behind her, James breathed heavily, and 2 airport maintenance workers followed, their own lights casting dancing shadows along concrete walls slick with condensation. 4 a.m. had come too quickly. Rachel had managed perhaps 2 hours of sleep, her mind churning through case details, building and dismantling theories. Now she was squeezing through spaces that felt like they wanted to collapse. She wondered if they were chasing ghosts. According to the schematics, we're directly under where Gate 17 used to be, said Marcus Chun, one of the maintenance workers. He was David Chen's nephew, and had insisted on being part of the search team when he learned what they were looking for. The old gate structure, as if it might explode in his hands. That's impossible, James said quietly. My dad was a gate agent. He worked overtime constantly. He was never... Rachel raised a hand, stopping him. Her instincts were screaming now, every alarm firing at once. James, she said carefully, I need you to understand something. From this moment on, everything you say matters. Everything you remember matters. Did your father ever talk about a special assignment? Extra security? VIP passengers? James swallowed. His throat worked like he was forcing something down. He used to say some passengers weren't really passengers, he admitted. I thought he meant diplomats. Or air marshals. He told me not to ask questions. Said the less you knew, the safer you were. Marcus shifted uncomfortably behind them. Detective, maybe we should get out of here. Rachel nodded, but her eyes never left James. We're not opening the film here, she said. We secure everything and leave. Now. They sealed the toolbox, photographed the cavity one final time, and began moving back through the tunnel. Every sound felt amplified, the scrape of boots, the drip of water, the hum of unseen machinery overhead. Rachel kept glancing back, half expecting to see another flashlight beam cutting through the darkness behind them. When they emerged into the maintenance access area, dawn was just beginning to bleed into the sky, a thin gray line over the terminal roofs. Back at the station, the evidence room felt too small for what they'd brought with them. The film was rushed to a forensic lab for development. The notebook and manifests were logged, copied, and sealed. Sarah Vance arrived just after sunrise, her face drawn but determined. Rachel watched her carefully as she laid out the facts, what they'd found, what it meant what her father and David Chun had uncovered. They were right, Sarah said softly. All of it. When the photographs finally came back, no one spoke at first. The images were grainy, taken hurriedly, but unmistakable. A man in seat 14C, his face partially obscured by a hat, holding a metal case between his feet. The same man stepping through a service door on the tarmac, escorted by a uniformed gate agent. Raymond Holloway, younger, thinner, but undeniably James's father. Another photograph showed the case open, just enough to glimpse its contents. Not drugs, not weapons, stacks of uncut diamonds, industrial-grade stones, raw and unregistered. This wasn't a one-off, Rachel said. This was a pipeline. Smuggling conflict diamonds through commercial flights. No customs declarations. No cargo inspections. A courier system hidden in plain sight, protected by uniforms and routine. And when Torres and Chun noticed, Sarah said, they became liabilities. The room went quiet. James sat apart from them, staring at the table. When he finally spoke, his voice barely carried. My father always said the airline took care of its own. Rachel looked at him, her expression unreadable. He didn't seal those men into a wall alone, she said. But he opened the door. The case unraveled quickly after that. Records subpoenaed, bank accounts traced, retired employees questioned. A quiet network that had operated for years collapsed under scrutiny. Some conspirators were dead. Some were very much alive and very nervous. Raymond Holloway never stood trial. His dementia was real, advanced, irreversible. When shown the photographs, he stared at them without recognition. But justice doesn't always wear handcuffs. For Sarah Vance, it came in truth. Her father hadn't run. He hadn't abandoned his family. He had done exactly what he said a pilot should do. He had reported something wrong. Months later, a plaque was installed near the international terminal. Small, easily missed by rushing travelers. It bore two names: Captain Michael Torres, First Officer David Chun. They saw. They spoke. They paid the price. Planes still take off every minute at O'Hare. Passengers still sit in orderly rows. And sometimes someone occupies a seat without anyone noticing. But now, people are watching. Because secrets don't stay buried forever. And some flights remember. Rachel's phone buzzed in her pocket, sharp and intrusive in the hush of the darkroom. She ignored it at first, her eyes locked on the photograph still floating in the chemical tray. The image felt heavier than paper should, like it carried the weight of 3 decades of silence. Ellen shook her head slowly. If that's cocaine, this wasn't small time. That kind of volume? That's organized, protected. Rachel finally answered the call. "Kim," she said. James's voice came through the line, strained, lower than usual. "Rachel, you need to get out of the building. Now." Her spine stiffened. "What happened?" "I went home like you said," he replied, "but someone followed me. Same dark sedan you noticed at the airport. It's been parked across the street from my apartment for over an hour. No plates." Rachel's gaze snapped back to the photographs. The courier, the gate agent, the ground crew, the sealed room. "They know we found the film," she said. "I think they always knew," James answered. "And Rachel, there's something else. My father, he had a safety deposit box. I found the key taped under his old desk. I don't remember seeing it before." Rachel closed her eyes for half a second. "James, listen to me very carefully. Leave your apartment. Go somewhere public. Bright. Crowded. I'm sending a unit to you now." She hung up and turned to Ellen. "Finish everything. Scan, duplicate, secure. Assume this evidence is already compromised." Ellen didn't ask questions. She just nodded and kept working. Rachel stepped out of the darkroom and straight into controlled chaos. Phones ringing. Officers moving with purpose. The quiet hum of a police station that had just shifted into high gear. Within hours, warrants were issued. The safety deposit box was opened under federal supervision. Inside, ledgers. Not handwritten confessions or dramatic letters, just columns of numbers. Dates. Flight numbers. Weights. Payments routed through shell companies that no longer existed. Names that had been retired, transferred, buried. But one thing stayed constant. Flight 227. Denver route. Seat 14C. By nightfall, the story broke. Not everything. Some details were still sealed, but enough. Enough to make headlines, enough to make people nervous. A 36-year-old aviation mystery solved. Smuggling ring used commercial flights. 2 pilots killed after attempting to report scheme. Sarah Vance watched the press conference from her apartment, the television volume low. Rachel's face appeared on screen briefly, controlled, professional, careful with every word. Sarah didn't need the full story anymore. She had her answer. Her father hadn't disappeared into nothing. He had been silenced. Weeks later, Hangar 7B was demolished completely. The sealed room no longer existed. But before it was gone, Forensic teams documented every inch. The scratches, the message, the proof that two men had fought until their last breath, not to be erased. James Holloway resigned from the department. No charges were filed against his father. Coercion was proven. Threats documented. Payments traced to accounts that suggested leverage, not greed. The truth was uglier and more human than anyone wanted. Ordinary people. Pressured. Used. The real architects were already dead or untouchable. But the pipeline was gone. Flight 227 no longer existed. And sometimes late at night when planes roar overhead and the windows tremble, Sarah thinks about Seat 14C. About how evil didn't arrive screaming or armed. It arrived wearing a suit, carrying a briefcase, waved through by routine. And how two pilots noticed and refused to look away. Some mysteries end with answers. Others end with warnings. This one was both. Fluttered open as if he were surfacing from deep water. Did I get enough? He whispered. Rachel gripped his hand. You did. You got plenty. James was taken to Northwestern Memorial, and within an hour a citywide alert went out for Gerald Summers. But Rachel already knew he wouldn't be found easily. Men like Summers didn't panic. They disappeared. By nightfall, the story had cracked open. The Tribune ran a short piece, careful, vague, but unmistakable. Cold case at O'Hare reopened after discovery of two missing pilots. Sarah Vance hadn't signed her name to it, but Rachel recognized her voice in every line. It was a flare shot into the dark. Summers responded the only way he knew how. At 11:47 p.m., the power flickered at Sunrise Gardens. Backup generators kicked in seconds later, but in room 214, Raymond Holloway stopped breathing. By the time Rachel arrived, it was already over. No signs of struggle. No forced entry. Just a cup of water on the nightstand that hadn't been there earlier. Poison. Clean. Efficient. Rachel stood in the hallway, staring at the closed door, understanding finally settling into something solid and unforgiving. Summers wasn't tying up loose ends anymore. He was declaring war. James survived. A concussion. A fractured skull. When he woke fully, he asked one question. Did he kill my father? Rachel nodded. James closed his eyes, a tear slipping out despite his effort to stay composed. Then I want him. So did Rachel. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. One of the cloud photos James had uploaded wasn't a document, it was a reflection. Summers' office window, glossy at night, had captured the faint outline of what was behind James as he took the picture. A departure board. Flight numbers. Times. One circled in red marker on the glass. 227. The same flight number from 1987. Rachel cross-referenced current schedules. Flight 227 now flew Chicago to Bogota twice a week. Tonight, it was boarding. Summers wasn't running anymore. He was finishing something. Gate 42 was chaos. Weather delays, frustrated passengers, distracted staff. Rachel moved through it like a current, badge-hidden, eyes-scanning faces. She saw him at the last second. Older. Thinner. But unmistakable. Gerald Summers stood near the service corridor, a familiar metal case at his feet. Seat 14C. Rachel drew her weapon. Gerald Summers. Don't move. He smiled. I wondered when you'd figure it out, he said calmly. You're late. He reached for the case. Rachel fired. The bullet tore through his shoulder, spinning him into the wall. Airport police swarmed instantly. Summers hit the ground hard, blood pooling beneath him, his smile finally gone. The case popped open. Inside, documents, passports, cash, and a list. Names, dates, flights, 40 years of disappearances. The trials took years. Summers died in federal custody before sentencing, a stroke finally doing what bullets hadn't. But it didn't matter. The truth was out. Families got answers. Names were restored. The service room beneath O'Hare was open, documented, and sealed properly this time with a plaque. In memory of Michael Torres and David Chun. They saw something wrong. They spoke. They were not forgotten. Sarah Vance stood at the unveiling, her article folded in her coat pocket. James stood beside Rachel, a scar on his temple, a weight finally lifted. Planes took off overhead, one after another. They never stopped flying. But some secrets finally stopped hiding, fluttered open unfocused. Rachel, he mumbled. I got it. I got everything. Don't talk. Just rest. Summers knows. He has people everywhere. He said the bodies were a mistake, that we were never supposed to find them. The hangar was supposed to be demolished years ago, but kept getting delayed. James coughed, wincing. He said it was just business, that Torres and Chun should have looked the other way like everyone else. Rachel felt rage, building in her chest, cold and sharp. Where did he go? I don't know, but he said something else. He said there are others, that this isn't over, even if we catch him, that the operation is bigger than one airport, bigger than one man. Paramedics insisted James be transported immediately. Rachel stepped back, letting them work. Her eyes scanned the office, taking in the signs of a rushed escape. Coffee still warm on the desk, the computer monitor dark, but quietly humming. A man who had spent 40 years building an invisible empire had finally been forced to run. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You found the pawns. Congratulations. But the game is far from over. Stop now, or everyone you love becomes a target. We've been patient for 36 years. We can be patient a little longer. Attached was a photograph. Sarah Vance walking into the police station, time-stamped from 15 minutes ago. Rachel's hands shook as she forwarded the message to her captain. Then she called Sarah. Where are you right now? Still at the station. In the conference room, going through more of my dad's files. Why? Stay there. Don't leave. Don't go anywhere alone. And Sarah, we need to assume they're watching us. All of us. All the time. Through the office window, Rachel watched planes take off and land. Hundreds of flights every day. Millions of passengers every year. And somewhere within that vast system, hidden in plain sight, a network had been operating since before she was born. Her father's killer was only one piece of a much larger machine. But now they had photographs. They had evidence. They had whatever files James had managed to save before Summers attacked him. It wasn't over. But for the first time in 36 years, the people who had killed Michael Torres and David Chun were running scared. Rachel watched another plane lift into the gray Chicago sky and made a silent promise to the two men who had died trying to do the right thing. She would finish what they started, no matter how long it took.